Well, welcome everyone. We're going to give it a few minutes here to let folks trickle in. So everyone hang tight and we'll do a little introduction and get things going.
Sorry, I didn't prepare a stand-up set for you all. But if somebody wants to send something in the chat that's a topic, I'm sure I could come up with a quick joke if anybody would like to have that happen. Um, or I can just ask the simple joke.
Let's do a whole bit. Yeah.
How many software engineers does it take to screw in a light bulb?
All right.
Zero. That's a hardware issue.
Boom, baby. Love it. All right.
Sorry, everybody. For it, if you're lactose intolerant like I am, I would say go and take the lactose pill now. I'm going to be making a bunch of cheesy jokes. That is who I am, and I'm sorry to uh, push you all do that. Uh, Jim, so I mean, it is a common joke that I go to, but I thought you might appreciate this because I was talking with Harry about this the other day, and she gave me the compliment that my humor and your humor are very similar. I would never say that my humor could ever match yours. But I am excited because for those who know airport codes, I'm going to be traveling soon and I am flying from Bodo, Norway to Helsinki, Finland, which means I'm flying boo to hell. And that alone will make. And we
Okay.
both got muted, so I don't think anybody heard the punchline, but I'm
Ah,
flying.
we're good. We're good. Are we good now? Okay.
All right, cool.
No, just saying we'll change today's topic to TA Comedy Cellar and just let you run with it, Jeremy, because it's going so well so far.
Well, I was going to say I've got a different topic for today, but do we want to get
Okay.
into it now that it's 2 or 3 minutes in?
Yeah, yeah, let's roll. So, guys, welcome. Very happy to introduce Jeremy Lyons, who is going to talk about creating a strategic recruiting ops function for your org. Jeremy, I'll let you introduce yourself. Just wanted to mention to those who are newcomers here, this is our third in a series of member-led discussions. Looking forward to this one. Is the first on this topic. New area for me in a lot of ways, and Jeremy has some deep expertise and a lot provided. There will be a lot here, so we'll do about 30 minutes and then reserve the remaining period of time for questions. We can certainly go on for quite a long time if we'd like, but uh, we'll try to keep it at 30 for you, Jeremy. And with that, go ahead.
Awesome. Well, so just to kind of change the topic on everybody, I thought I was going to tell you all about the history of the Quokka. But I guess now I'm being told I need to talk about strategic recruiting operations, and so I will be doing that instead. So welcome everybody. Why is it not? Okay, there we go. So today we're going to talk about how to create a strategic recruiting operations function. Something that I have done in a couple of places, advised on a couple of places. My name is Jeremy for those who are unfamiliar. Just kind of a real quick, because I don't like to spend too much time talking about myself. I've been in the recruiting operations space for 8+ years. I will always tell people jokingly, I have been in recruiting since birth because my mother was an executive recruiter. End of 2022, I founded RecOps Collective with kind of a two-part goal. One part was to make recruiting operations accessible to everybody, not just those in tech. The other was to provide resources and documentation for RecOps professionals, which led me to create the RecOps Roundup, which is the most popular, most widely read recruiting operations specific newsletter. I don't know how that happened. It just did. But I'm very grateful for that. I also created what this should say is I created the first RecOps specific GPT. It is the most popular GPT in the OpenAI store. Again, not really sure how that happened, but I've continuously updated. And then one thing I always like to tell people too is I'm neurodivergent. Uh, Kind of found that out a little bit more later on in life, but I've learned from some really great people. And I think that what is sort of thematic a little bit between a lot of people in the RecOps community is the fact that a lot of us are actually neurodivergent. And then whether it is obvious or not yet, My favorite animal is a quokka. If you are unfamiliar, uh, this is what they look like in real life. They are from Australia, where all fun and weird and vicious animals come from. But obviously, this does not look that vicious and or anything like that. Okay, jumping into the agenda for today, we're going to talk about the foundation of recruiting operations. A lot of people still come up to me and ask me, all right, well, what is RecOps? What does RecOps do? How does RecOps do the things that it does? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how do you know when you need a recruiting operations team, when you need to start building that. We're going to talk about how do you build that. And then we're also going to talk about how do you measure success. And then finally, as Ben mentioned, we're going to be doing a Q&A. If you have questions that come up, please, by all means, feel free to write them at any point. We will go through them. And if you like to just say mean things, or if you want to poke fun at me, by all means, please do that. I can laugh at myself. Do that in the chat. All right. So a couple of key themes that I want to talk about when we're talking about RecOps. And I've written articles about most of these themes or done presentations on them. But one of the key themes through it all is that RecOps starts with why. And that is a take on Simon Sinek, start with why. But fundamentally, RecOps is there to create efficiencies. And one of the ways that you create efficiencies is by going back, looking at processes through first principles thinking, root cause analysis, and more. And many of those things center on why questions. I will also say this later on. I've built out a maturity model for your RecOps team, and you'll see how it switches from a why question to a how question. RecOps starts at the beginning. In order to build a foundation, you need to start at the beginning. Otherwise, you are building on something that might not be as stable as you think it is. It doesn't mean that when you bring in RecOps, you need to tear everything down. Sometimes some of the stuff there is good, but it does mean that your RecOps teams, the earlier you can get us involved in your processes, the better, because that will lead to better outcomes. And then finally, RecOps is not a buzzword. That will be something thematically that I will talk about throughout. I know that it is a newer function, especially to TA. TA has operated very differently within how it views its ops functions as opposed to the way marketing and sales has viewed theirs. So that becomes something important to also talk about. All right, so base foundational layer, what are the pillars of RecOps? And there are about 4 main pillars that everybody in the space can agree on. There are a couple of supplemental pillars as well, but the first and big main one that we're going to be talking about is operations. Now, your operations pillar is going to be your systems and your tools, your process improvements. This can also be a recruiting coordination team if that's rolling up into your RecOps team, and that's how you have functionally designed your organization. It can be vendor management. It is really centered around the day-to-day tactical work that you are doing. Next pillar is programs. These are going to be things like your referral program, your internal mobility, maybe internships, early careers. This is going to be assessment programs, structured hiring. Maybe you have a bar raise.
In April. Me.
You know, I know some people are really, really excited to talk on the thing, so I just had to mute that. Sorry. But these are going to be the programs that your recruiting operations team oversees, measures, defines, builds, helps everybody do that. Next, we have our analytics and reporting. This is probably what a lot of people know recruiting operations for as well, with, you know, building dashboards, KPIs, things like that. And then finally, we have our strategy pillar. And this is where you start to use your RecOps team to talk more about the long-term vision. Unlike some of your other department heads, and when I say department heads here, I'm referring to like maybe your head of G&A, maybe your head of sourcing, maybe your head of tech. What recruiting operations does is looks across the entire board and sees where all of everything is set up. Now, there might be some overlap in terms of things. I have seen KPIs be used as programs, not data. that can, move in. And I think that it's important when you're interviewing recruiting operations people to be very specific about where things are sitting in order for people to understand, okay, this is the language that I'm going to need to be using when I interview with your organization. Now, the fifth pillar, this kind of depends. Some people have grouped employer branding underneath recruiting operations. Sometimes that comes as like a, hey, recruiting operations is going to talk to your marketing team and work with them. Sometimes employer branding sits within the recruiting operations team because maybe you don't get marketing resources. All in all, it's one of those things where it's a sort of maybe pillar. And so I didn't want to put something here that foundationally a lot of people might say, well, it's not there, or it is there. But let's start talking about what is RecOps and what is it about. RecOps is about efficiency and cost savings. It is there to make your recruiting team better, more efficient, more cost efficient. We are there to try to help the recruiting team be viewed as a revenue generator, not necessarily as a cost center. And to that end, we are there to help you make data-driven and data-informed decisions through looking at our data, talking about it, and being able to really deep dive into each individual thing. One of the things that I like to say is there is a difference between data-driven and data-informed. Data-driven means you are only looking at the raw data and making a decision based on that, whereas data-informed means you have the data and you're looking at the long-term. There might be other elements that are not necessarily showing up in the data that could have an impact. We are about scalability and agility. Now, when I use scalability here, I'm not talking about only the team going up. I'm also talking about the team going down too. It all deals with what skills are you going to be looking for in your RecOps professional, but it is about how do we make these people more efficient and everybody on the team more efficient? How do we keep them flexible and coming in with new ideas on how to maximize? And to that end, operational excellence. That is what our group is here to do. Our group is to make the recruiting team look good to not only our internal stakeholders, but also externally, because we oftentimes are dealing with the candidates. And so that is an important thing to talk about. And I've just now talked about candidate and stakeholder management, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. And then finally, it's the strategic and operational integrations. So that is looking at our tech stack, looking at how we are doing things and bringing them all together strategically and operationally. Thematically, what you're seeing in all of that is your RecOps function is there to help you be proactive in the decisions that you're making and proactive in the moves that you're making. That is recruiting operations. But you can't talk about what it is without talking about what it is not. And one of the big things that I oftentimes hear is that, oh, well, RecOps is just my recruiting coordinator plus. And what I mean by that is they're just a fancy new recruiting coordinator, and I'm just going to send them stuff and they only do scheduling. That is not if that is how you are treating your recruiting operations team, or that is how you think RecOps is, kind of need a mindset shift there. It's not a replacement for recruiters. It is a skill set, and we'll talk about this more later, but there are people who do this work, and some of these people don't necessarily need recruiting experience to be better at it. And I know that might feel a little uncomfortable for some people. It is not a one-size-fits-all approach. That is very, very key. RecOps is incredibly nuanced because every organization is nuanced. You can't just sort of say, hey, it worked here, so it's going to work here. You can have a playbook, but your playbook is only going to survive first contact, and then you're going to need to adapt it. And if you're not adaptable and you're not forward thinking, this space is going to be very, very difficult. It's not just building dashboards. Recruiting operations does more than just build dashboards. It's not just technology implementations. We're not just there to pick a new tool, put it in place, and then let everything sort of fall into place. We have to do the enablement. We have to do the teaching. We have to do all of those elements. And we're not the basement or the attic. For a lot of people, they think the recruiting team or the RecOps team is just there to like, hey, recruiters don't want to do this. We're going to throw it at the RecOps team. We have lists, we have our backlogs that we're trying to get to try and make the teams better. We can structure them very differently, but the more you throw and sort of think that you can just throw stuff into your attic or your basement and forget about it, it's not going to make it's not RecOps. And all of that thematically follows. It's not purely reactive. There's reactive things that we do, but if you're looking at your RecOps team being like, it's purely reactive, then you need to rethink sort of your recruiting operations team. All right, getting into it. So how do I know I need a RecOps team? So when is it time to build a RecOps team? Well, for one thing, you'll know it's time when the headcount in your company is going up, or again, it could be going down, but in this case, it's going up, and you need to be able to scale your processes, not just to be focused in like one, like on a singular person level, but you need it to be focused across the board. You need it to be able to scale. To that end, maybe you're adding more tools, maybe you're adding more vendors. There's overhead that needs to come into place. And this is where RecOps teams can come in and be extremely helpful. Process complexity. Maybe you're about to go IPO. Maybe you're adding more people, more departments. Maybe there's an integration. This is where RecOps teams can come in and certainly help make your team better. On the other side, things that are decreasing. Maybe you're looking at your data integrity and going, oh God, I can't trust this data anymore. That's where a RecOps team can come in and help. Maybe you're a department of 1 or 2 or 3, and you're like, I have zero time to work on strategic work because I'm spending all of my time in the weeds trying to do this thing or that thing. And that's where, again, a RecOps team can come in and help. And then finally, you find that most of the decisions and most of the things that you're doing are purely reactive, and your productivity is suffering for that. Your RecOps team, remember, is there to make your team more efficient. So what are some of the ways that you can look at things and say, okay, I definitely need to bring in a RecOps person, either full-time or fractional. And one of them is to pressure test your system. So go back, look at your systems, look at your process, and say, how many manual steps does it take to get a candidate scheduled? How many people are involved in each step of the hiring process? If X person were to leave in Y days, what would our capacity models look like? And this is where things like visual process maps can really, really help. Look at your long-term and short-term goals. Is the company looking to expand headcount, but not looking to expand the budget? This is where a RecOps person can come in and really help create the processes in place, optimize your tools to really help. Is the company heading towards an IPO or a massive RIF? That can happen. And do you know you need to make changes for the next stage in your company's development? That is something that a RecOps person can come in and certainly help with. And then finally, what's the current perception of TA within your org? Is your TA org being seen as a order taker? And why is it being seen as an order taker? How do you help your recruiters move into being talent advisors? That is where a RecOps team can certainly come in and help. And then also, do you have the needed conversations in place to get the resources that you need? And that can be also a perception of TA as well. So how do you build a case for a RecOps person? One of the first things I always recommend people do is look at your efficiency data. We know that making a business case for any role can be certainly supported if you are looking at time data, actions in stage data, manual steps in stage data, and anything you can go back and look and say, you know what, if we bring in a person here, that will reduce X to Y, that will lead to more hires, more candidate hiring manager experience, these things become really, really important. And to that end, looking at your candidate and hiring manager NPS scores, that is something that we'll talk about a little bit later, but that's one of the things that you can certainly use as a measure of success to determine how successful is your recruiting operations function helping you. One of the things too that recruiting operations teams can help you do is certainly reduce decline rates. That is a case that you can make. You can say, if I bring in this person, I will have X, Y, and Z capabilities. We will be able to spend more time with candidates, spend more time doing the things that we need to do to reduce decline rates. And then finally, looking at the timeline. Obviously, that is a lean into the fact where if you've done your strategic audit and you see where things are going, either a full-time resource or a fractional resource can certainly come in and help you out there. So how do I build a strategic RecOps team? Obviously, this is something that people are coming here to see. And let's say that you've built your case, you've got approval. So what comes next for your function? So you're wanting to ask yourself the following function before you hire your RecOps person. So the first one is am I going to build bottom up or am I going to build top down? And what I mean by this is, do you need a head of recruiting operations that's coming in with years of experience in building out all of these processes? Maybe they've been at a large company before. That has its benefits. Or maybe you need somebody that is maybe at the more specialist level who maybe has done it at one company or has the experience and is able to leverage that experience to help you build, because maybe as a head of TA, you're like, you know what, I really want to hold on to some things and I really want to coach some people up, and that's what I want to do. And to that end, what are the pillars? Now, I say defining your pillars is really, really important, because it's very easy when you have a position like a ops function, like a RecOps function, especially where we touch everything, to get very distracted through the interview process when somebody comes along and sort of says, hey, have you heard about my friend programs? When really what you've been assessing for is operational and data. Then all of a sudden you're going to change your entire viewpoint and maybe you won't go back and talk to candidates. So you need to look at the pillars that you are looking on, or that you really want to either hold on to, or really where you're going to need them to focus now and later, so that you don't get distracted. Essentially build your needs versus wants list based on what is in those pillars. And to that end as well, what is a successful partnership going to look like between you and your RecOps person? A lot of the RecOps skill set lends itself really, really well to being essentially the chief of staff to the head of recruiting. And so we want to be the right-hand person. We need that information. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But what is a successful partnership going to look like between you and this individual? Because if you're somebody who is like, I want more control, I want more of this, then you're going to want to be able to articulate your working style to this RecOps person. And then finally, you have to ask yourself, where is this position going to sit? And the reason for that being is that, especially over the last couple of years, we have seen RecOps people be no longer underneath a recruiting umbrella and being put underneath people operations, being put in the office of a COO, being nestled underneath something else. So if this is not going to be your specific resource to manage, you need to think about what that relationship is going to look like, and what that emphasis is going to look like as well, and the skills they're going to need to have. And then finally, and this is something that we're going to dive into just next, is, do you need your RecOps person to have recruiting experience? I'm going to jump right into it. Here is something that is slightly controversial, hard to talk about, but I think that it is important to say, which is, of course, every time somebody enters the room, it takes me off. Being a brilliant recruiter or sourcer won't make you a genius RecOps person. But likewise, being a genius RecOps professional won't make you a brilliant recruiter or sourcer. And that is because there are two different skill sets involved here. And both sides are going to bring something different. Recruiters are going to need to have more client relationship, more sales, more negotiation skills, persuasion, collaboration. RecOps people are going to need to bring that project program management, problem solving, teamwork and collaboration, analytics. There are a lot of people out there who sort of think, oh, my RecOps person needs to have a recruiting operation background because they're going to talk recruiter. That's okay, but you need to look across the board at the skills that you're bringing, because you're not hiring a recruiter. You're hiring an operations person. And this is why I say there are skills that you should be thinking about when you're hiring for this person. One of those is can this individual define the why? When you show up with a process, are they able to see through it and say, okay, this is why we are where we are. This is what things look like. You want somebody who is curious. And I say too often, people look to hire RecOps professionals with a playbook, and that can actually be really, really counterintuitive. When you hire someone with a specific playbook, everything becomes a nail to them. What you need in this individual for your RecOps team is somebody who's going to come in and build specific to your company. Doesn't mean that they haven't done it before in the past, but if everything is a nail to them, when you start to show them screws, they're not going to know how to process that. And that becomes very, very, very important, because that can also reduce your efficiencies. You need somebody who's adaptable. If you are a change-averse person, you should probably not be in a RecOps seat. That will make it very, very hard for you to be successful, because you're constantly going to be pushing back when you actually need to be diving in, doing the research, and figuring out how to move all of those pieces. And that's where being analytical is really, really important. And it isn't just about the data. It's about critically thinking about everything. Not every solution requires a technical problem, and not every solution requires a soft skill problem. You have to think through how all of those things are coming together. And also when you're thinking about how to build a roadmap, how to bring everybody into one cohesive vision. And that's why I also say teaching is a skill that is incredibly important here. You have to be able to bring people along on the journey, because that is also what RecOps is. Yes, you can do the work, and some people aren't going to care how you got from point A to point B, but sometimes the how you got from point A to point B is really, really, really important for how you've made the decisions, or how the decisions are being made, so that everybody can get behind them. Now, obviously, we can't talk about everything without talking about AI. I could go on and on and on and on about this, but your AI strategy will also impact your RecOps build. And the reason why I say that is, if you are building your AI strategy as a co-pilot, you are going to really invest heavily in the enablement and the talent management programs. You are really going to invest a lot of time into making sure that people understand and maximize writing prompts, things like that, getting comfortable with it. I know that Jose Kong refers to AI as augmented intelligence because of how it mixes the human and machine. It can also lead into a number of different models, like using ACE, which is assist, coach, expert, and tools, and how you use those tools. But on the other side, we have to acknowledge that maybe your RecOps function is coming in there to help you build a fully automated tech stack and tech process that is not going to replace people. Some people are going to be asked to do that. And if your company's strategy is to build something to replace, you're probably not going to be looking at the enablement side as much, but what you are going to be looking at is that data cleanup, making sure you have tight documented processes that can be fed into an AI to help make everything more efficient and going by that direction. So here's how you're going to set up your RecOps team for success. The first one is giving them a seat at the table. If you are building a large team, I'm not saying you need to invite the entire RecOps team to the party, but what I am saying is that if you have a RecOps person, you need to involve them early on at the table. Systems-wide changes don't work as effectively if the RecOps person is getting important information secondhand. The even more important thing here is that you also acknowledge that the other stakeholders to this person that they will need to be working with. So that could be your finance, that could be your sales team, that could be other ops functions that they're going to need to be shown to not to be at that same level as all they are and with the same level of respect. Next, streamline. The most effective RecOps teams are ones that are able to be, again, plugged in and are streamlining everything to create those efficiencies that your team needs in order to be really, really, really successful. After that, roadmap. Building the roadmap, and I'm going to say this again, I've said it again and again, RecOps teams are there to solve problems and priorities and build those and reprioritize things. Allow them the opportunity to see the full picture, because very seldom, and I'm going to use an example in a little bit, is one thing ever actually the thing that you're solving for. And then finally, context and feedback. This kind of comes back to that why piece and why that why piece is so important. If they lack the context and they lack the feedback, and I'm talking about giving honest feedback about stuff, we operate very differently. We need to know information. We can't deal with information and build things if we don't have all of the context in place. So, all right, I talked about giving an example. So I'm going to go by really, really quick in this. So I was working recently with a client, and they were saying, "Oh, you know what? We need a new ATS." And to like build out a strategic function, again, I've talked about this. You need to allow people to come on a journey with you. To many recruiters, an ATS shift, and this is kind of a recruiter mindset a little bit, is it's just another tool. We're just going to use it. We're just going to roll it out. To RecOps, it's more than that. It's a shift in fundamentally how the team and the business will accomplish their next goals. So as I was helping this client evaluate a new ATS, the client kept talking about how they were extremely excited to be more on a more modern ATS, and they were looking forward to all the new data and automations that would be available to them. And they had already asked their network. They had already said, you know what, look, we have an ATS in mind. This is the one that we really want to do. The problem with that was they hadn't done any of the upfront work. They hadn't built their foundational elements yet. And so what they were going to do is they were going to run into problems because they were going to be trying to ask the tool, or they were going to bend their processes to the tool, not ask the tool to help them. So instead of forging ahead and just being like, hey, look, cool, you want it, let's get this going, blah, 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 ask them what they and the team were looking for. And what came out of that was the team wanted structured hiring, and they wanted hiring manager-driven processes, and they had no foundation for it. No tool is ever going to solve for that problem. What it will do is it will influence the solution, but you needed to start building those programs. And so I conducted a few more interviews with internal hiring managers, and they told me, yes, we want this hiring manager driven process, but we want something that's so easy and isn't really click heavy. And everybody wanted better data, which would only come from having better process in this scenario. So ultimately what I did was I sat everybody down, I took all my information, and I helped them determine the original ATS that they had identified was a lot of horsepower, but they were only going to be able to be using a fraction of what would be there, and they would be underutilizing it for relative to the cost. So instead, what I did was I found another ATS for them that met all their criteria, would allow them to do what they needed to do. And then I built them a 5-year plan tied to metrics that would show them, okay, this is where you'll go, and this is when you're going to get to that, you needing that, all that firepower for you, and how you can build good habits now. So operationally, it showed that looking at the process and the refinements needed to be built to build that better and faster recruiting engine. Programmatically, they knew that now they needed to build out the hiring manager training. They needed to work on structured interviewing implementation. Data-wise, now they needed to build in those processes and get everybody aligned on what those processes were going to be so that they could have predictable outcomes. And then strategy-wise, it saved the company money, and they were able to go back and say that. Okay, I know I want to get to Q&A. So how do I measure success for my recruiting operations team? You'll start to see the following changes. One is your data integrity will come up. That's something that a strategically placed recruiting operations team will help you do. reinforce that data integrity, do data cleanups. Your strategic work for your recruiters will be able to go up. They will have different conversations. Efficiency metrics will increase, or in certain cases, when we describe an increase here, I'm talking about going down, so they will get better. Satisfaction metrics should increase as well. You'll start to see fewer decline rates because you're spending more time on less manual tasks as opposed to building those relationships. And then finally, your complexity will decrease. And now, when I say your complexity will decrease, I'm not saying all of a sudden everything is going to be so point and click simple, but it means that you're not going to have to sit there and think, okay, did I do this? Did I do that? What is going on here? It's less thinking, more doing. Finally, this is the RecOps maturity curve that I've built. Your Gen 1 recruiting operations team is probably going to be focused on why questions. So borrowing from data literacy, just data analysis. That's your descriptive type of data where people are sort of saying what happened. Every question kind of is a what. Your Gen 2 will sort of have why questions. So why did this happen? Why did we get where we got there? They'll start to be able to use the data more effectively. And finally, your Gen 3 will talk about how. So how should we be preparing for what's next? So getting into kind of the closing out here, again, final thoughts before we get into Q&A that I want to leave you with. RecOps starts with why. As you can see, fundamentally to any problem a RecOps professional has to solve before any action can take place is why. And we are able to operate with high levels of ambiguity if we have that why. It's important that we know what our North Star is. We can build into that. RecOps starts at the beginning. The biggest mistake, again, I see teams do is when they come up with an idea and then they bring in their RecOps team to build it, is that they might already be excited about one sort of thing, and then they might be asking their RecOps team to perform miracles to make it happen. Whereas if you bring your RecOps team to the table earlier, you can work through phases of the projects a little bit faster. RecOps is not a buzzword. It is a skill set. It is a mindset. Yes, it can be learned. So it's, important there. And then finally, sort of tough work up front saves long-term pain later. Your RecOps team is there to do that up front work. And the more you do up front, the less thinking you have to do at the back, the faster that you're able to go. For those who want to get connected with me, that is my LinkedIn QR code. If you would like, that is actually also my link tree. I have a bunch of the articles that I've written, my newsletter, the GPT, a lot of things like that, other places where I've spoken. And then that is also the QR code for the GPT if you would like to use it. Ben, Q&A.
Time. Jeremy, that was terrific. Great job. Thank you so much. Yeah, wonderful. A lot of takeaways. I have a ton of notes here. We will be sending out a recording for folks who have to dip off early, but we'll just keep this going for a bit. I mean, I'm free for a while here. Anyone who wants to stay on, Jeremy, you have some time, right?
Yep, I've got about 15 minutes.
Cool. Okay, so we'll just open it up to questions. I'm going to start it off because I have one that I'm just kind of had simmering as you were talking. So I'm envisioning kind of two categories, and there's probably others, right? But the two categories of companies that might actually decide, hey, this is something I want to do. One being one that's like, hey, I don't have this function at all, brand new. This makes a lot of sense to me. Let's try it out. Two, we do have it, but it's not performing optimally. I think we can do this a lot better. So starting in those two spaces, what would you say if you were to come in as a consultant, or when you talk to these types of companies, what would you say is like the lowest hanging fruit, day one wins you can bring to each? Not
Yeah,
you,
I
or
think
somebody in the space, right? Just the function itself.
I think what's funny about the RecOps space is that there are a lot of things that we borrow from other places.
Mhm.
And it's actually very funny because if you have a good understanding of behavioral economics, you have a good understanding of biopsychology, and then you sort of think about how do people think about these problems. One of the very first things that I always try to do to find out what those low-hanging fruits are is try to determine if, and this goes back to my joke previously, is is what I'm looking at from a data perspective, what I'm hearing perspective, from a process perspective, after everybody has walked me through, is that a software issue or is it a hardware issue? And
Okay.
what I mean by that is if it's a hardware issue, it's something that you could easily go, you know what, hey, we're going to replace this. So going back to an ATS example, let's say the company is growing and they have their ATS, has a very strict process and they want more sophistication. They want to get more data and it's just simply not allowing them. And their processes are tightened up and everybody is like, look, like we've ridden this horse as far as we can and we need a new horse. You can replace an ATS. Like that is like a hardware. I don't like it. I'm going to replace it. The harder part is looking at going back and using first principles thinking to get back to how did something happen. And so, for example, maybe it's like you're looking at their engineering process and the engineering interviews have 9 interviews in it. And you're like, why do you have 9 interviews? And you come to, and you start asking the back questions, not solutioning at every point, but you start coming back and you essentially come to find out that, well, of the hires, of 100% hires that this company has made in the last year, 50% of those people have left the company within 6 months. And when you go back, you go, okay, so 6 months, 50% of people have left. You go and you break down that data and you say, like, well, why are we seeing this attrition? And you come to find out that of that, most of the people are like leaving because of manager performance or like they're like their relationship with their manager. Well, on the recruiting operations side, that's not something that you're going to be able to fix.
Right.
But what you are going to be able to fix is walking that process back forward and saying, okay, what is it about this manager that is making them so difficult to work with? And if they are very difficult to work with, then what you are asking candidates are very different questions and sort of like, hey, do you know how to code and go? And instead you're asking somebody a different question along the lines of like, have you ever worked with a manager that has these high demands or it worked in this kind of environment before because we want to set you up for success later. And that's something that you kind of come to find out can be a quick win because now all you're doing is you're shifting questions, you're shifting the script, you're shifting the dialogue. That can make a huge difference in how people are interacting with your recruiting team and the candidate experience and the hiring manager experience and who you go and you source for.
Yeah, yeah. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, a huge takeaway for me at least is kind of being given the permission to carve off the analytics side and the efficiency side of recruiting from the actual recruiting work itself and separating it and saying, hey, we're going to have a whole separate area where we're thinking about efficiency and kind of designing things from an engineering standpoint and saying, hey, it's not, everyone doesn't have to wear every single hat, and be good at everything. There's a whole separate area that's very useful. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah, I mean, to that end too, there's um something that's a little bit of like a quiet part that I've certainly talked about with other RecOps folks in the space, talked to some recruiters on the same side, is that the relationship that marketing and uh sales ops, rev ops has with their teams is that their marketers or their sellers are sort of like, hey, cool, you're going to take the recruiting off, or you're going to take the operational pieces off. Like, I don't have to, I just need to send you an email. You're going to update my Salesforce for me, or you're going to update my HubSpot for me. Fantastic. Cool. That allows me to focus my creativity or my calls or my time on those pieces that are revenue generating what I'm being measured on. On
Sure.
the recruiting side, there has been a little bit different of a development there where a lot of people either have been forced into situations because the whole teams have been laid off and they're the only person left standing, or or the situation has been I'm an agency and I've done the full house, or it's what, like, the more I can do, the more likely I am to keep my job. So I don't want to necessarily give up power or position in any kind of way to other people. And that means that sometimes there's this friction point between RecOps teams and recruiters around like what it is we're trying to do. And many RecOps people, especially if you're the first hire in, have to overcome that sort of objection of sort of being like, hey, look, like I know you've done this and I'm not here to step on your toes. We can bring you in for whatever you want, but like I need to be able to do and make decisions in ways that the whole team can get behind. And if we're constantly butting heads, this is not a productive relationship for what we need. And people need to know that.
Yeah, sure. Questions from anyone else?
Brooks.
Hey, how's it going? So just quick question. Just say the company has established that they need a RecOps person. They've identified the level that they want to hire. Just coming in from like a 30, 60, 90-day kind of perspective. Let's just say within the first 30 days, you've kind of put the skeleton together and figured out like what bones do we have? Um, i.e., you've done stakeholder interviews, you've done process mapping, maybe there's some existing process mapping, maybe you create, uh, what's left over, you audit your systems and tools, and you start running, what the data shows you today. My question is like once you've identified those gaps and like established like where how big the foundation is and how solid it is, like how do you prioritize which initial initiatives to tackle first? And then like a secondary question is, just approaching project management like for multiple initiatives, how would you go about managing that?
So I want to make sure that I got it. So the first part was prioritization, and the second part was about project management across multiple different project places that are using that code switching that you need to be.
Exactly.
Got it. Perfect. So in terms of that prioritization, so I think that Ben Bear has talked about this a ton. He's phenomenal to follow. Same thing with like Luke Eaton, in that you've gone on that list, doing that listening tour, you've done that process mapping. Now you're sitting back and you're doing that prioritization. And so one of the things that I like to do is I like to go and use Scrum principles, because when you are in that recruiting operations position, sometimes a lot of people are like, okay, we want you, now that you're here, we want you to solve everything. And as the economist in me says, energy is finite, time is finite. You only have so many times. And essentially, if you're trying to multitask literally everything, your brain can't handle it. And so I think when it comes to the prioritization, I love to set things up in sprints. And that way you're focused on those major pieces for those 2 weeks. And you can sort of set like your P0s, your P1s, your P2s. Ultimately, one of the things where your partnership with your head of TA can be really, really important is getting that context. So at least in the first couple of rounds, when you first get started, it's at that like 60-day, kind of in that 60-day window, is talking to them about, all right, what is this? What's our relationship with these other departments? When people are talking to me, where should I be sort of placing all of these things? And that can also then help you within your project management side, be able to communicate very clearly where things are at for the different stakeholders that might be involved. Again, the partnership piece can also really help you prioritize too, because let's say, for example, you're not actually sitting on the TA side, you're sitting in a people ops, on the people ops side, or you're sitting underneath the COO side. You're going to have those contending priorities, even if your top priority is the recruiting team. So one of the things that I always like to do is at least have my list, stack rank my list, go through and thematically also align, because sometimes, like if you're going to be doing like process realignment and you know that you need to be updating documentation as well, those things can go kind of at the same pace. You can be doubling those, as opposed to sort of saying, okay, we're writing process now, and then we're going to write the documentation for it later. Does that answer your whole question though?
Yeah, so just from like once you establish your priority levels and you have your stacked rank list of like, okay, these are the things that we want to tackle immediately, you're not necessarily, doing one project from A to B and then moving on to the next one. Maybe you're, juggling two of those highest priority levels at a time. Um, from a day-to-day perspective, I guess, for two projects that have the same priority, you know, is it a good idea to kind of create ownership within the recruiting team and pull recruiters in to kind of allow them to be builders rather than, just assuming that this is one person, right? Generally, RecOps is
Yeah.
a smaller team, the recruiting team is larger. Um, you know, how do you manage that bandwidth?
Yeah. So I am always the way that I work is I always love to bring people along with me. On the thought that like, hey, look, if I were to fall off the face of the planet tomorrow, are we still set up for success? Do people know what I was thinking when I was thinking about it and how I was thinking about it and what's that thought process? And I think one of the things that recruiting teams and recruiters can certainly do, especially if you're a team of one, is you can go to the recruiting team and sort of say, hey, I'm about to kick off this sort of project. Or you could talk to the head of recruiting and say, hey, I'm about to kick off these sorts of projects. Is there anybody on the team that you would like to come along on the ride with me, or has expressed that they would love to learn more or about X, Y, and Z? Great example of that I can think of is um, last year I was working on a project where I was implementing a lot of like building out basically the company's prompt library and thinking about how are we going to use these prompts to solve problems. And one of the things that came up in conversations with my manager was, well, there's this recruiter who's really interested in learning about prompting and really interested in learning about AI. Can they kind of follow you along because you kind of seem to really understand this stuff? And I said, yeah, sure. Like I'm gonna tell somebody how I'm thinking about this and teach somebody about how to do this so that they have the skills so that now, because they've learned, if they go and they see somebody doing something that isn't the best thing, they can go and they can teach them. And then you have this sort of catalyst effect of people learning from each other.
Great.
Do we have any other questions? No, well, I
Hey,
think we
Ben
have
and
time.
Jeremy.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to piggyback on that. So with TA Ops at Northern Trust, like one of the things that we implemented over the last year was we created regional process leads within our recruitment teams. So we have our dedicated recruitment or talent acquisition operations team. But then embedded in the recruitment teams, we have people that kind of split. So they have their recruiting roles, but then half of their role is also operations. So they are responsible for, they do a lot of the testing when we have like upgrades, rollouts, different things like that. And they're also the ones that are helping to drive and implement a lot of the processes that we're rolling out, and they're kind of the boots on the ground, and kind of the eyes and ears to help us understand where are there areas of opportunity, what's going on, what are they hearing, what are the teams struggling with, and that helps us to kind of prioritize some of the work that we do, and it's been tremendously helpful.
And to also piggyback on what Brooks is saying there too, one of the things that whenever I show people the pillars, everybody's like, oh, if you're a RecOps person, you have to be good at all of these pillars. And the truth is like, it's very, very, very hard to be good at all of those pillars. You are naturally going to find people who are maybe really good at like one, maybe two, and have a very, very good understanding at like to complete the set of skills. So when they're building their teams, you have to think optimally about how are you bringing people in. Because the other thing too is sometimes, and I see RecOps people, especially ones who maybe don't feel like they're like they feel, imposter syndrome in it, which they shouldn't. But what they do is they'll over index on one of the pillars and use that pillar to sort of explain away some of the other things. So they might, let's say, be really good at the operations pillar and really good at the programs pillar. And then when somebody comes to them about a data thing, they'll sort of say, yeah, here's our data, but you're seeing this because over here on the operations side, we're struggling to do this. And so that sort of, I would say, don't put pressure on yourself to be good at literally everything, because now you're just going to weigh yourself down. But instead, look for ways where you can complement where maybe you're not as strong and come in. So, for example, maybe analytics isn't your strong point. You can get everything to a certain point, but brilliant analytics people. It's like partner internally if there's a people analytics person. Go and talk to the marketing side if they've got an analytics person and say, hey, look, like I'm seeing this, but can I like get your help for this? The best formulas that I ever used in Google, I learned from a marketing person. I didn't learn them on the RecOps side. So it's really this position where you always have to be learning. And that's the exciting part, because every day is different and you have to code switch and you learn stuff. But you also have to recognize that when you know and when you don't know. And when you don't know certain things, don't try to sort of be like, I don't, like, oh yeah, no, I know this. Certainly talk ahead and get people to teach you stuff, because people like to talk about themselves and people like to teach. Most of the time, people will set time to you. And if nobody in your company is willing to do it, there are resources outside of your company that will certainly help. And that's something that I also try to highlight um, within my newsletter, to help people there.
Well, great, guys. I think we're coming up on the end of time of extra innings here even. So I think we'll wrap. And Jeremy, I want to thank you again. I think that was really helpful. I have to have you back for another session because we can go on forever here. But want to thank you. Thanks all for attending. Reminder, big thank you to our sponsor, Andiamo, without whose help we couldn't really be doing any of this stuff. Andiamo specializes in your whole gamut of things that can be done from an agency recruiting standpoint. So your RPO, your contingency placement, your payroll services. Thanks to all the attendees. Keep an eye out for a lot of new announcements in the year ahead. We're excited about a lot of new programming ideas we have and getting some more folks involved in talks such as this. But yeah, we'll wrap there. Jeremy, thanks one more time. See you all soon.
Thank you, everybody. Feel free to reach out to me.